The so-called COVID-19 pandemic has been traced to a 1976 word-buying plot. The Zionists are having a field day in the absence of an agreement to reboot the world economy. They are stalking a war between China and the US, promoting their pandemic and vaccine scam and causing trouble all over the world. If we are going to defeat them once and for all, we need to realize that we are dealing with an enemy who works according to long-term plans, some going back hundreds of years. The latest example of this is the ongoing COVID-19 and vaccine scam. British MI6 intelligence now say the COVID-19 was traced back to a document at the word-buying date in 1976. It is a form of eugenics involving the UN and its organs. If you look at the world map of so-called COVID-19 cases at the link below, you will notice it is essentially a disease affecting monothesis-controlled countries. Africa is mostly avoiding the whole scam, as it is most of East Asia. So, if it is eugenics, as MI6 claims, the target appears to be mainly people of European descent. The P3 Freemasons are saying the COVID-19 campaign is only going to intensify until an agreement is reached to set up a world republic. Certainly, the P3 Lodge involvement is easier to spot in Japan and Korea, where all positive test results are being traced to either Christian sects or Khazarian mafia hedge funds. That is why it's disturbing that pharmaceutical companies are being granted legal immunity in the case the vaccines cause harm. This is a unique situation where we as a company simply cannot take the risk if in 4 years the vaccine is showing side effects, said Ruth Robert, a top expert at AstraZeneca. Furthermore, the statistically impossible prevalence of COVID-19 among politicians, celebrities, etc. is a sign the elite are being told to play act coronavirus in order to keep the shippers scared. There's also, of course, the aspect of the White House using coronavirus as an excuse for a big purge of Santanas. But that is only part of the story. The other big theme being pushed by the Zionists is an escalating conflict between the US and China. The US State Department propaganda machine is pushing a doctored document known as The Secret Speech of General Shi Haoxian, which claims to contain secret Chinese plans to invade the US, kill women and children, and use biological warfare. Of course, the opposite is true, since everybody who read the Project for a New American Century knows the Zionist regime has been treating race-specific or ethnic-specific biological warfare as a useful political tool. Also, the Zionists took over the infamous Japanese Unit 731 Biological Warfare Division and have been developing bioweapons ever since. They have been well documented, using biowarfare agents like weaponized insects during the Korean War, for example. Since 11 September, they have built biological warfare research institutions all over the world, including Wuhan, China. The anti-China cheerleader is U.S. Zionist Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who has been saying things like, "The old paradigm of blind engagement with China has failed. We must not continue it. We must not return to it. And the truth is that our policies and those of other free nations redirected China's falling economy, only to see Beijing bite the international hands that were feeding it. The Americans have also received a nasty shock during their last China baiting expeditions to the South China Sea." A crucial Chinese report, unavailable and not referred to by Western media, and translated by Hong Kong-based analyst Thomas Wing Poland, is essential to understand the context. The report refers to U.S. Growler electronic warplanes rendered totally out of control by electronic jamming devices positioned on islands and rips in the South China Sea. The vulnerability of U.S. electronics was also exploited by the Russians recently when they turned the U.S. Aegis warship in the Black Sea into a sitting duck that could have been sunk by a 19th century warship. The Zionists also appear to be using weather warfare in an attempt to break China's Three Gorges Dam. If the dam broke, it would flood 4 million Chinese and kill at least 500,000 people. However, those using such weapons must realize China would retaliate by doing something like blowing the Yellowstone caldera. The Chinese, for their part, note structural changes have led to a U.S. withdrawal from global affairs and waiver of responsibilities, and the COVID-19 pandemic is probably the first global crisis in more than a century where no one is even looking for the United States for leadership. In case, despite all the arguing between the regime of U.S. President Donald Trump and the Chinese, the world is now entering an era where neither the U.S. or China will be dominant. That is because both the U.S. military-industrial complex and the Asian secret societies that run China realize they both face a common enemy, the Khazarian Mafia, aka Zionists. The situation the U.S. corporate government faces is so dire. The world is aware of this, which is why the Zionist slave people known as Americans are banned from visiting most countries, including next-door neighbor and supposed ally Canada, allegedly because of COVID-19. With the exceptions of the UK, Americans can now visit only the few Caribbean and Eastern European countries like Belarus and Ukraine. The real reason Americans are being banned from travel is that the regime of U.S. President Donald Trump has nationalized the Federal Reserve Board. This means that inside the U.S., they can create money out of nothing and hand it directly to American citizens and corporations. However, that money cannot, with few exceptions, be used outside of the U.S. That means Americans are being banned from most of the world, in part to prevent them from taking their US-made $5 and spending them outside of the U.S. Inside the U.S., what the Trump folk have been doing is pumping up local champions like Tesla, Amazon.com, Apple, Alphabet, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft in an attempt to rebuild their economy. The problem is that 40 years of deindustrialization and the largest step in the history of humanity cannot be solved with short-term liquidity injections into a few American companies. This is especially true when you realize that none of these companies actually manufacture much stuff inside the U.S. Instead, these companies are hurting the U.S. economy by using FRB funny money to buy up dozens of enterprises that could evolve into competitors of these giants. In other words, the so-called pandemic response is shutting down tens of thousands of real businesses, while concentrating wealth and power into a few Khazarian mafia-controlled high-tech oligopolies. The increasing wealth disparity inside the U.S. is also creating huge social instability. Within the last 40 hours, there have been eruptions of violence in major cities such as Seattle, Portland, Atlanta, Chicago, New York, Oakland, Louisville, Austin, and Richmond. At this point, we have seen sustained protests and rioting for nearly 2 months straight, and it looks like the chaos isn't going to disappear anytime soon. The fact that up to 40% of American businesses and individuals are not paying either loans or rent is a sign things will get worse before they get better. It is tragic to note that a Reddit situation has degenerated to the point 30 million Americans did not have enough food to eat in the last week. In a sign hyperinflation is coming to the U.S., the country is facing a coin shortage. Argentina experienced the same problem when they had hyperinflation because coins were worth more than melted down their face value. You can be sure somebody's doing business melting down pennies and selling the metal. If things continue to degenerate, soon manhole covers will start to be stolen. Already cities like New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco can't even handle garbage collection anymore. Their chutes are filling up with discarded needles, human feces, and junkies. Domestic turmoil and international behavior mean the U.S. is now a rush state now, MI6 intelligence sources say. The fact even a close ally like the UK is secretly viewing the U.S. as a rush state means new world sanctions against U.S. officials are just a matter of time. According to the UN, for example, the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was an unlawful and arbitrary killing, especially when, according to the UN findings, There is no evidence that Soleimani was planning an imminent attack on the United States or its personnel. The U.S. distraction with its bankruptcy continues to create a vacuum on the world stage that is setting a ground for various regional wars. The biggest remains Turkey, which is pushing hard to create a new caliphate and is headed for a clash with France, Egypt, and Russia. In this context, the sudden hospitalizations of the kings of Kuwait and Saudi Arabia indicate the battle for the Middle East and its oil resources is intensifying. Informants from Turkish intelligence approach us to explain that Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Erdogan is a crypto-Satanist pretending to be a Muslim. As evidence, they point to Turkey promoting Terminator seeds and Turkish-backed militias involving in organ trading. Erdogan has just turned Hagia Sophia back into the mosque as a part of his road to promote the Muslim-Christian war. It is interesting to note Erdogan's so-called enemy Libyan warlord Khalifa Haftar is also reportedly a Mossad agent. Apparently, they are working to provoke a Russian military move in the Middle East. Adding to the intrigue, a parallel claims that Iran, Israel's sworn enemy in the regime, has also been providing Haftar with military aid in his campaign to topple the UN-recognized Government of National Accord in Tripoli. The ongoing clash between Egypt and Ethiopia over a dam Ethiopia is putting on the Blue Nile. The source of 80% of Egypt's water could also turn into a fierce regional war. What's interesting is that the Russians are catching up on the Zionist attempt to get their country involved in some sort of Middle Eastern Gog versus Magog type of war. Most notably, we can getting a lot of reports from our Russian sources about anger against Mossad agent Zeev Putin because of plans for an October vaccination regime. Russian FSB sources say Mossad has told them two of their agents, Vladimir Putin and Ksenia Sobchak, have been demoted. If this is true, expect some sort of Putin-related incident this autumn. In any case, until a new financial system is announced and the post-war world architecture is revamped, the Zionists will keep filling the vacuum with their criminal plots. The latest on this front is that work on the new system will resume in earnest in September. Hopefully, a nice October surprise.